No human figure dominates the pages of the Hebrew Bible more than David, the sweet psalmist and celebrated shepherd king of Israel. But one biblical writer dared to tell what another desperately tried to hide. I'm Ross Nichols for HOREB Institute, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is Sunday School. If we include in our count the superscriptions on the Psalms that are attributed to David, we come away with the name David being mentioned more than 1,000 times in the Hebrew Bible. Now, what that means is that the name David is the third most frequently mentioned name, proper name, in the Hebrew Bible, only under the Tetragrammaton, Jehovah, and the name Israel. But Israel throws the count off a little bit because sometimes Israel refers to the man, to the patriarch, Jacob, who became Israel, and sometimes to the nation Israel. But when we're talking about a person, no name in the Hebrew Bible, other than God's name, appears more frequently. When we include the New Testament, we get 58 times in 53 verses the name David appears in the New Testament. So what that means for us is that David clearly, hands down, is the best known person in biblical literature. Now, we get a lot of pictures of David because we have a lot of different writers writing at different times about different stories about David. We get a lot of pictures. One of the most frequent images that shows up in biblical literature is that David is presented by the biblical writers as a warrior, From the time that we see him defeat Goliath of Gath, Goliath the giant in 1 Samuel 17, and throughout all of the narratives of David's life and times, we get the image portrayed by the writers that David is a champion fighter. He's one who goes out and fights on behalf of his people and on behalf of God and so forth. Now, one of the things that I wanted to begin with as we get into our exciting story today is that David is presented as a champion and he uses skills that he claims, or the writer for him claims, are a gift from God. In other words, God actually trains David. And I want to give you a couple of passages. The first passage that I want to talk to you about is in 2 Samuel chapter 22, verse 35. It has a parallel in Psalm 18, verse 34. In fact, 2 Samuel 22 and Psalm 18 are parallel all the way down, with only minor differences between the two different writers. But in 2 Samuel 22:35 and Psalm 18:34, it says, He, referring to God, teacheth my hands to war, so that mine arms do bend a bow of brass. Right? So that's the image that we get, is not only is he a great warrior, not only is he strong and valiant and skilled with weaponry, but he gets that skill from God. We have another passage that I also want to share. This one is from Psalm 144, and it says very similarly, Blessed be Jehovah, my rock, who teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight. So again, he attributes his great skill at war to the Lord himself. Now, often the stories of David's military exploits are told by different writers, and they come to us in different forms, slightly different form. But what we find, though, particularly after the death of Saul, so in other words, you have stories about David before Saul dies. It's a big part of his story, his ascension to the throne when Saul was the first king. But once you get to the death of Saul and Jonathan in 1 Samuel 31 and 1 Chronicles chapter 10, we see a lot of parallel text. Sometimes in Samuel, sometimes in Chronicle, they share some of the same stories, but they are clearly, very clearly by different writers with different intentions and different aims, which is the focus of today's class. So again, David is presented as a valiant warrior who went out and came in front of and on behalf of for the people. Now, this particular phrase, to go out and to come in, is often used by the biblical writers to indicate a military leader, someone who leads from the front. Even today, we say the best warriors lead from the front, not from the back. You go out first, you come in. Based on two Hebrew words, we see this in a couple of other passages, actually several. And it's Yachad, to go out, and bo, to come in. David is presented by the biblical writers as one who is with the troops. First one out comes back with them, right? That's the image that we get. So I'll put a couple of those texts in the chat. They'll also be in the description of this video. For instance, Joshua 14:11 describes Caleb as being one who goes out and comes in with the troops and so forth. We get that of David himself in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 13 to 16. But all of that said, something happens in the biblical text. It's one of the most powerful stories in all of biblical literature, and it's based on three Hebrew word formations. It appears in both Samuel and it appears in Chronicles. And here is the Hebrew phrase, V'David Yoshev Birushalayim. And David, but David, stayed or sat or remained in Jerusalem. David stayed in Jerusalem. Now, what I described before is that David is known as a valiant warrior, a champion who goes out before the troops and he comes back with the troops. So this ought to signal us. The biblical writers are saying something different here. And indeed, something is different there. Again, it's mentioned in both Samuel and Chronicles, and we're going to look at both because I want to show you a vast difference between the storytelling in Samuel and Chronicles, and it's to the point that one of these sources feels like one of these sources has something to hide. Now, what I want to do is I want to go to the chronicler first. So I want you to go with me right at this point to 1 Chronicles chapter 20. 1 Chronicles chapter 20, and I want to pick up in verse 1. So 1 Chronicles chapter 20, get my Bible to work right, in verse 1 says the following, and it came to pass at the time of the return of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle, that Joab led forth the army and wasted the country of the children of Ammon and came and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried at Jerusalem. And Joab smote Rabbah and overthrew it, and David took the crown of their king from off his head and found it to weigh a talent of gold, and there were precious stones in it, and it was set upon David's head, and he brought forth the spoil of the city exceeding much. And he brought forth the people that were therein and cut them with saws and with harrows of iron and with axes. And thus did David unto all the cities of the children of Ammon, and David and all the people returned to Jerusalem. Now, this particular passage gives me pause. Something's not right about this, and if you can't see it yet, you will. That's the purpose of this class. But we begin with the phrase, the way the ASV translated it, says that, and David tarried at Jerusalem. He tarried at Jerusalem. And then the next thing you know, it says David is on the site of the battle and he takes the crown from the king of the Ammonites. Well, wait a minute. I thought David was in Jerusalem. Now, some of you may say, oh, you're picking too much. Anything could have happened. Maybe David joined the troops later. Well, let's look at the parallel accounts, because what I want to show today very clearly, it's it's so clear when you see this that you're going to understand better than you ever have that we have different sources telling stories for different reasons, and one writer may leave out, in fact, in this case, truly leaves out quite a bit. Let me tell you how much. If I read the account of what I just read in Chronicles, and if I read it next to, horizontally, next to what we find in 2 Samuel chapter 11 and following, you're going to see that the two accounts are so different. Samuel contains more than 50 verses, entire stories that aren't in Chronicles. Now, before you say, well, maybe the writer of Chronicles just didn't want to report everything that Samuel did. There's more to it than that. So what we're going to do is, go with me now. I'm going to reveal a little bit of this at a time. So go with me to 2 Samuel, 2 Samuel, and I want to go to chapter 12, and we're going to pick it up in verse 26, 2 Samuel 12, 26. Now Joab fought against Rabbah, the children of Ammon, and took the royal city. This is what we read in 1 Chronicles chapter 20 and verse 1. And Joab sent messengers to David and said, I have fought against Rabbah, yea, I have taken the city of waters. Now therefore gather the rest of the people together, encamp against the city, and take it, lest I take the city, and it be called after my name. And David gathered all the people together and went to Rabbah and fought against it and took it. And he took the crown of their king from off his head, and the weight thereof was a talent of gold, and in it were precious stones, and it was set on David's head. And he brought forth the spoil of the city, exceeding much. Sound familiar? And he brought forth the people that were therein, and put them under saws, and under harrows of iron, and under axes of iron, and made them pass through the brick kiln. And thus he did unto all the cities of the children of Ammon, and David and all the people returned unto Jerusalem. So what we have is, in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles, we do have a story where the battle is about to kick off. Joab is the one who leads the army out. David stays in Jerusalem. Now, Chronicles just skips an interim part there, and David is all of a sudden on the scene. Because the chronicler, as you'll see, does not want to diminish David in any way. He doesn't want to say that Joab had to call him. In fact, according to 2 Samuel, Joab has to tell him, hey, look, I'm paraphrasing, I've done all the hard work, but you better come and join the battle, otherwise I'm going to get all the credit. Now, that's a good commander. He doesn't want to take the credit of his boss. Now, let me tell you this. Joab knew exactly what David was doing in Jerusalem when he sent that message. And listen to me, it wasn't good. In fact, it was very bad. Now, how would Joab know what David is doing in Jerusalem? And would he be part of something? You bet he would, and the Bible tells us that he did. He was part of a conspiracy, if you will. Joab was complicit in some really bad criminal activity, right? Let me tell you what it was. David and Joab worked together to kill a righteous man. They worked together to have Uriah the Hittite. Not only is Uriah the Hittite a good man from the little bit that we know about him, but he had him killed, and Uriah happened to be one of David's mighty men. So this is a strong warrior for David and for Joab. But they had him killed. He was inconvenient. He was in the way. Why was he in the way? And by the way, the chronicler doesn't tell us all this. The only way we know it, because the chronicler's trying to make the story go away. Believe me, you will in a minute if you don't yet. Chronicles does mention Uriah one time, because it has to. The chronicler tells us that Uriah the Hittite is one of David's mighty men. You couldn't put a list of David's mighty men out and not include Uriah, But he doesn't include the part about David and Joab working together to kill him, right? But Samuel does. The two of them work together. In fact, the chronicler, not only does it leave anything out about this horrible, ugly story, it works very hard to make sure any trace connected to that story doesn't make the final cut. So if I look at 2 Samuel 11 next to 1 Chronicles 20, I see this vast difference in the storytelling. More than I realized. Even this week, I discovered more. So let me tell you what's going on back in Jerusalem. Remember, Joab is across the Jordan. He's on the east side of the Jordan. He is in the country of the Ammonites. And so what's going on in Jerusalem is a story that's contained in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 2 through 27 about Bathsheba. Now, we're going to read a little bit of this in a minute, but I'll tell you the story. We all know the story. David remained in Jerusalem. Samuel tells us that. Chronicles tells us that. Joab leads the troops out. David stays back. Now, in 2 Samuel 11, the story picks up. All the men are fighting. David strolls out onto his palace porch one evening, and he sees a beautiful woman. We know her as Bathsheba. And not only does he see her, he sends someone to find out who she is. And they come back and they tell him that this is Bathsheba. They even tell her that she is the wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of his mighty men. But David, not being one to take no for an answer, he thinks she's beautiful. He sends someone to bring her to him. He sleeps with her, and by sleep, I'm using a euphemism for the children listening. And she then later sends word back to tell David, I'm pregnant. Now, the story continues. David has to come up with a plan. You can read this for yourself. I think most people know the story. What happens is he thinks, I've got to get Uriah back from the battle, so maybe he'll sleep with her, and then that since she's pregnant, then everything will go away. The problem goes away because they say, well, the baby is Uriah's. So he fetches Uriah from the battlefront, brings him back. Uriah shows up. The king invites him in. I'm sure that Uriah probably wonders what all the to-do is about. And then there's a little bit in the story about some small talk. So, Uriah, how are you? How's the battle going? How's Joab doing? Are the troops doing okay? Look, Uriah, you know I'm paraphrasing. Uriah, go to your house, and you've enjoyed this nice meal and drink with me. Go to your house and, freshen up a bit. Well, Uriah doesn't do that. Uriah goes outside the king's palace, and he sleeps among the servants. Word gets back to David. David, Uriah didn't go down to his house. So David calls him back the next day into the palace, gives him more food, and it says he got him drunk because he's hoping that under the intoxicants that will make Uriah run home to his wife. But he doesn't. Once again, he sleeps right there with the servants. Now, by this point, David knows that this isn't going to work. So what does he do? He calls Uriah back in and sends him as a courier with his own death sentence. He sends him with a note to Joab, and the note basically says, take Uriah the Hittite and put him on the front lines in the heat of the battle, and then draw back so that he doesn't have a chance and he'll die. Sure enough, that's what takes place. That's what takes place. The troops fall back. Other troops, not just Uriah, but other troops die. The message is sent from Joab through a dispatch, through a messenger, a courier. He brings the message to David and he says, Uriah is dead. Now, he also David responds to Joab, and you can read this for yourself in verses 22 through 25. He sends the messenger back to Joab, and he says, tell him, sometimes war is ugly. The sword takes some, and some survive and some don't. Shake it off. Now, go and be successful in the battle. By the way, again, just so you know, this story really stands out, what I'm telling you today, if you have Newsome, a synoptic harmony of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, because you can clearly see what Samuel included and what Chronicles made sure did not make it into his or their book. Just didn't show up. The chronicler left it out. Now I want you to read with me 2 Samuel. We're going to pick up in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 26 and 27. And when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she made lamentation for her husband. And when the morning was past, David sent and took her home to his house, and she became his wife and bare him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased Jehovah. Now, what follows, remember, keep this. Every time I tell you part of this story, in your head, I want you to hear, the chronicler didn't include this. The next part of the story, in 2 Samuel chapter 12, is a story that we're also very familiar with. It's the story where Nathan, we just read at the end of chapter 11 that the thing that David did, and it was a doozy, you just heard it, he had Uriah, he got Uriah's wife pregnant, he knew Uriah, he knew that this woman he saw was the wife of another man, he got her pregnant, and then had, with his co-conspirator Joab, he had Uriah murdered, killed in battle. So now in chapter 12, Jehovah's displeased, and he sends Nathan the prophet. And the story in chapter 12 begins with a parable of sort. You remember the parable about this rich man, and he had lots of flocks and herds, and he had everything basically. And there was another poor man, and this poor man only had one little ewe lamb. And the ewe lamb was so precious, it used to nuzzle in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. And his children loved the little lamb, and they would, it goes on and on. So you're listening to the story. Imagine you're David. Nathan is telling David this story. And then the story goes on that a rich man didn't want to take one of his own flock, so he takes this ewe lamb of the poor man and he kills that one. Now you can imagine as the story unfolds, it says in verses 5 and 6 of 2 Samuel chapter 12 that David blows up. He's immediately and visibly shaken, and he said, whoever did this should die. The person that did this, because it is a horrible story. And what does Nathan the prophet tell him? Look with me at 2 Samuel chapter 12, and let's pick up in verse 7. And Nathan said to David, thou art the man. Thus saith Jehovah, the God of Israel, I anointed thee king over Israel. I delivered thee out of the hand of Saul. I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I would have added unto thee such and such things. Now, wherefore hast thou despised the word of Jehovah to do that which is evil in his sight? You hast smitten Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and hast taken his wife to be your wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thy house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith Jehovah. Behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of this sun, for thou did it in secret. But I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. Well, the only reason it's before all Israel and before us today and before the sun is not to the credit of the chronicler. But Samuel gave us all of this story. If it wasn't for Samuel, we wouldn't know it. And that is a shame, because this story is such a wonderful story. And you're going to see, not only is it helpful to the people who read it then, it helps us today. It helps us today. Now, David, when he hears this, is truly, from what we can tell in the biblical text, devastated. He is repentant. Remember, we get Psalm 51 out of this. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later in the class. But I want you to know that according to the biblical writer, he repents of his evil as much as he can. He can't undo the death of Uriah, and Bathsheba is pregnant. Now, unfortunately, according to the story, the baby dies. This child will die. That was part of the sentence. But then we get the birth of Solomon. Now, by the way, we're not done with the differences between Samuel and Chronicles yet. I want to read in 2 Samuel chapter 12, 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 24 through 25. And David comforted Bathsheba his wife, and went in unto her, and lay with her, and she bare a son, and he called his name Solomon. And Jehovah loved him, and he sent by the hand of Nathan the prophet, and he called his name Jedediah for Jehovah's sake. Jedediah. So here we have, after the troubling situation and the death of Uriah, and then the death of the baby. Remember, you can read this story. It's all there in 2 Samuel chapter 12. After all of that, David once again gets Bathsheba pregnant. This time she has the child Solomon. Now that made me think, because, we think we know the Bible, but since I'm doing this comparison, I said, well, what is the chronicler going to do about the birth of Solomon? Does it give us anything different there? Well, you're going to be surprised. Go with me to 1 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 5. 1 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 5. These were born unto him in Jerusalem, Shemaiah and Shobab and Nathan and Solomon, 4 of Bathshua, the daughter of Amiel. Now there you go. Now let me break this down for you. So it's in a list. When we talk about the birth of Solomon, it's in a list. And you say, so what? It doesn't give us the rest of the background. Well, I'm going to say there's something else going on here. He can't really get into what 2 Samuel did, but this is different. Listen to this. You recognize the difference in the names? Go with me to 2 Samuel 11:3 to make this point. 2 Samuel 11:3. And David sent and inquired after the woman, and one said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So if I read 2 Samuel 11:3, I've got a woman named Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam. If I read 2 Chronicles, not only does it leave the story out about Uriah the Hittite being killed and Joab and all of that, the name is changed. Now, you can tell me in the comments if you think it's another reason. A lot of names are different in the Hebrew Bible. But from Bathsheba the daughter of Eliam, wife of Uriah the Hittite, becomes under the pen of the chronicler Bathshua, the daughter of Amiel. No mention of Uriah the Hittite. I find that to be striking, as if someone has stricken it from the story. Now look with me at 1 Chronicles chapter 14. And I want to read verses 3 and 4, because this is another passage in the Chronicles. And David took more wives at Jerusalem, and David begat more sons and daughters. And the names of the children whom he had in Jerusalem, Shammua and Shobab and Nathan and Solomon. Doesn't even mention the mother's name there. Let me underscore this for you. Bathsheba is not mentioned ever, not a single time in the Chronicles, not once. Now, what I found interesting as I unpacked this when I prepared for this session, I even find it odd that even in the New Testament, in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 6, Solomon's mother is referred to as the wife of Uriah. Like the woman's name was changed by the chronicler and stricken out. It's not even mentioned in Matthew chapter 1. All of this is strange. But it gets worse. As we work our way through the material in 2 Samuel, we get things that were promised or predicted because of David's sin. Absalom rebels. He seeks the throne. In fact, let me back up. If you go back and you remember in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 10 and 11, you need to put this in your notes, it's predicted these family problems. By the way, the chronicler is silent. And the reason the chronicler is silent about the family problems that I'm going to tell you about now is because you, the reader, would say, why is all this bad stuff happening to David? Right? Because you wouldn't know, reading the Chronicles, about the sin that brought this on. So the family problems have to be taken out. To wit, the rape of Tamar. Now, you probably know this story. You don't know it from Chronicles because Chronicles doesn't give it. But the rape of Tamar in 2 Samuel 13, you remember the story? David's son Absalom, right, had a sister named Tamar. Now, Tamar is a beautiful girl, Absalom's sister Tamar, and another son of David named Amnon. Amnon is David's oldest son that was born to him in Hebron. Now, Amnon falls smitten in love with Tamar, and he wants her very badly. So this big, horrible story takes place. And Amnon ends up raping this girl, Tamar. It's horrible, right? But it gets worse. So Absalom, another son of David, knows that the other son of David raped his sister. So he kills. Absalom has Amnon murdered. I mean, this is because the family problems were predicted because of what David did. By the way, not only is the chronicler silent, the only mention the chronicler makes of Absalom or Amnon are in genealogical tables in 1 Chronicles chapter 3. Very harmless, no narrative, no story, just these two boys also happen to be sons of David. Samuel's like, yeah, let me tell you what they did. Now, there is a short-lived reconciliation between David and Absalom in 2 Samuel chapter 14. But when I say short-lived, I mean short-lived. Then Absalom rebels. He seeks the throne, and David flees Jerusalem. The chronicler doesn't have any of this. And by the way, put this in your notes. Psalm 3, according to the superscription, is a psalm that David wrote when he fled Jerusalem because his own son was seeking to kill him. Well, that's what happened because of the sin that he committed with Bathsheba and killing Uriah. But the chronicler is silent. And then Absalom violates his father's women. 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 15 to 23. And the chronicler is silent. Joab kills Absalom. Remember Joab? Joab is a commander that was a co-conspirator in the killing of Uriah the Hittite, the strong, mighty man of David's army and husband of Bathsheba. Joab now kills Absalom, and this devastates David. You can imagine, I mean, I'm going through just hitting the high points on all the problems that he was facing in his life because of this sin that the chronicler didn't put in. Now, these troubles in David's life continue chapter after chapter. It's nearly 10 complete chapters the way our Bible is organized now. And the chronicler is silent. Now, get this, and this is very evident when you get a book like this one in Newsome's book. When you get to 2 Samuel 21 and 1 Chronicles chapter 20, finally, the two different accounts sync up. And it just jumps right back into the game like nothing ever happened. And David and the troops are at war with the Philistines again. The entire scandal is stricken from Chronicles. Let's look at that one more time just so you get it and you really get it. 1 Chronicles chapter 20, and I want to read 1 through 4. Now, I want you to remember this, that in between what I read is that entire ugly story that was caused by David remaining in Jerusalem and taking another man's wife and having the soldier killed and so forth. Here it is. And it came to pass at that time, at the return of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle, that Joab led forth the army and wasted the country of the children of Ammon and came and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried in Jerusalem. Skip a few. 1, 2, skip a few. And Joab smote Rabbah and overthrew it, and David took the crown of their king from off his head and found it to weigh a talent of gold, and there were precious stones in it. It was set on David's head, and he brought the spoil of the city exceeding much, and he brought forth the people that were therein and cut them with saws and iron and axes, and thus did David unto all the children of Ammon, and David and all the people returned to Jerusalem. And then it picks up with the rest of the life. All lived happily ever after. None of the horrors that 2 Samuel told us are ever mentioned. The chronicler chose not to include the story of David taking Bathsheba, the daughter, the wife of Uriah. He chose not to put any of that in. He also chose not to put any of the subsequent bad, because if you put the subsequent bad, then, the following bad, then you're going to have to say, well, how did this happen? So you have to leave it out. So one of the most important things about David is taken out. Not only that, the chronicler changed Bathsheba's name. And I would say to you, say her name. Bathsheba, say her name. Now, at first glance, one might say, well, I could see why that story was stricken. It's pretty bad. But I'm going to tell you this. Telling the story of David's grave sins and his repentance is beneficial to us. It's worth reading through the bad so that we might understand that we too can make mistakes. I mean, think about it. If the sweet psalmist, the man after God's own heart, the celebrated shepherd king of Israel, can stumble and confess and repent and be restored, why would you not tell that? Some writers want our heroes to be perfect. I don't. You know why I don't? Because I'm not perfect. And I would bet, and I'm not a betting man, but I would bet that you're not perfect either. It does us better to learn that even the great, even the people who are responsible for giving us the sweetest psalms, that they can sin and be redeemed and restored to God, I just think it's tragic. Now, when David does repent, Psalm 51, one of the most beautiful and moving pieces in all of the Bible, all of ancient literature, is just, it's incredible. Now, I'm not going to read it all to you, but I want to read Psalm 51, beginning in verse 9. Psalm 51, and let's start in verse 9. Purify me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Make me to hear the joy and gladness, that the bones which thou hast broken may rejoice. Hide thy face from my sins. Blot out all mine iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from thy presence, and take not thy Holy Spirit from me. You know, he saw Saul get the Spirit taken from him. This is personal. This is David. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, and uphold me with a willing spirit. Then will I teach transgressors thy ways, and sinners shall be converted unto thee. Deliver me from blood guiltiness, O God, and God of my salvation, and my tongue shall sing aloud of thy righteousness. He's saying, if you take me back, don't take your Holy Spirit. Forgive me of blood guiltiness. He says, then I will show sinners your way. And he did over and over. Give you an example. Look with me at Psalm 32. Psalm 32, I just want to read this to you, beginning in verse 3. When I kept silence, my bones wasted away through my groaning all the day long. For day and night thy hand was heavy upon me. Moisture was changed as with the drought of summer, Selah. I acknowledged my sin unto thee, and mine iniquity did I not hide. I said, I will confess my transgression unto Jehovah, and thou forgavest the iniquity of my sin, Selah. For this, let everyone that is godly pray unto thee in a time when thou mayest be found. Surely when the great waters overflow, they shall not reach unto him. So he's saying, I was sinful. I felt the weight of that sin, which the biblical writers describe all the way back to the time of Genesis chapter 4. Remember, Cain says, it's too much for me to bear. David is admitting that he felt that. And he said, you, modern reader, person watching this video, you felt it too. So go to God. This is the picture you get when you see someone like David fall and repent and say he would teach others how to do the same. So let me ask you to do this. If ever in your life you've felt the weight of sin, if you've ever felt it and then been moved to fix it, to get right with the other person that you wronged, to get right with God, if you've ever felt that, particularly because of something David said, put a comment. Let me know, because I think that he did what he said he would do. If you enjoyed the class, I'm going to ask you to like it, leave your comment. That's what I'm really interested in. And if you know how to hype a video and you think it's worth it, hype the video. And as always, thank you for watching.